Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowy, drafty, pumpkin-free and sometimes questionably fragrant realm of medieval Halloween. Yes, before it meant pumpkin spice lattes and decorative skeletons, Halloween was something way stranger. No trick or treating, no $60 rubber masks, and, brace yourself, no fun-size candy bars. Instead, there were ancient bonfires, foreboding bread rolls, teenagers dressed in animal hides, and a generous helping of existential terror. If that resembles your last office gathering, you might already be ready. So before you strike a match and attempt to conjure a Wi-Fi connection, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this sort of thing. Leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. Lower the lights, turn on a fan for that eerie breeze, and settle in. Maybe even wrap yourself in a blanket. Extra credit if it's scratchy wool and smells faintly of cabbage for historical authenticity. Now let's play a little game of Have You Ever Pondered? Have you ever pondered what folks did before plastic pumpkins existed? How do you carve a turnip with a blunt knife? Was ghosting created by medieval villagers? And if so, did it involve real ghosts? Did people actually bob for apples? Or was it more like pray you don't choke on a dodgy medieval pear? And what did you distribute to kids at your doorstep if candy wasn't invented yet? Smallpox, salted fish, a courteous warning about the plague. Congratulations! You've just awakened in 1382. It's All Hallows Eve, the most haunted night of the year, and you're standing in a muddy village square wearing your second-worst tunic, surrounded by bonfires, intoxicated peasants, and the subtle smell of burning rutabaga. Good luck. Welcome to the original Halloween, a patchwork of pagan bonfire gatherings, Christian rebranding, and widespread nervousness about the deceased. Forget plastic bats. Here you worry about real spirits hungry for a meal or maybe a ride. The boundaries between worlds are supposedly thin tonight, which means it's time to light a fire, offer a prayer, and hope the ancestors are feeling generous, not spiteful. Let's establish the scene. It's late October. The crops are harvested, the nights are growing colder, and you're down to your final pair of dry socks, which, by the way, are made of woven goat hair and the lingering hope that you won't develop trench foot before winter. You've survived another harvest, and now, as the days grow short and the wind starts sounding like your mother-in-law's disapproval, your village prepares for Samhain. That's pronounced sown, as in, you're so in over your head with these spirits, friend. Samhain is ancient, like nobody remembers when it started ancient. Long before anyone considered marketing plastic pumpkins, Celts across the British Isles would mark the conclusion of the harvest season and the beginning of winter with bonfires, feasting, and an unsettling amount of nervous laughter. Tonight, according to legend, the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. This is wonderful news if you want to reconnect with Grandma Edith. Less wonderful if you're concerned about all those ancestors you never returned a borrowed shovel to. So what do? You build a bonfire. Not a polite, Instagram-worthy campfire, but a full-on towering inferno that could be spotted from the neighbouring village and possibly by anyone in the afterlife with decent eyesight. This isn't just for warmth. Fire is a magical spiritual force, the medieval equivalent of do not disturb mode. You toss in bits of the harvest, a handful of last year's mouldy bread, and anything else that might appease the supernatural. Don't have anything to offer? Good luck. The only thing hungrier than the living tonight is the dead. Now, before you get too comfortable, let's discuss the atmosphere. It's dark. Candles exist, but only if you're wealthy enough to waste precious tallow. Most people just squint, stumble, and hope they don't trip over a wandering goat. The air is filled with strange sounds. Wind rattling the shutters, distant church bells, and if you're really unfortunate, the village bard experimenting with his new dirge remix. Every shadow could be a spirit, a neighbour in a terrible costume, or, let's be honest, probably both. Into this darkness comes the church, attempting to make sense of all this torchlit chaos. Around the 8th century, in a move that can only be described as the original Brand takeover, Christian leaders proclaimed November 1st to be All Saints' Day or All Hallows. October 31st becomes All Hallows' Eve. Eventually, Halloween. Suddenly, your bonfire bash is now an official warm-up for Mass, and your prayers are directed not just at the ancestors, but at an ever-expanding list of saints. The idea is to sanctify the season, but really most villagers just add a few new saints to the guest list and continue as usual. Meanwhile, everyone's still anxious about the ghosts. People wear disguises usually made of rags, animal skins, and whatever's remaining in the barn after the cows have had their way with it. The theory? If a spirit comes calling, maybe they'll mistake you for one of their own and move along. In practice, it's just a solid excuse to hide your face and anonymously mock your neighbour Gerald for stealing your turnips. The outcome is a holiday that's part harvest festival, part group therapy, and part supernatural insurance policy. There's singing, eating, dancing, and the constant low-level anxiety that something is about to go horribly wrong. But it's also comforting in a peculiar way. Everyone's scared together, huddled around the same fire, telling stories and pretending they're not afraid of the dark. So as the flames crackle and the wind rattles the shutters, you sit back in your lumpy tunic and remind yourself if the dead really are out and about. Tonight, at least you've got a big fire, a community, and the world's most haunted loaf of bread. That's the genuine spirit of medieval Halloween. Awkward, smoky, and absolutely unforgettable. Samhain pronounced sown. And yes, you'll be corrected on this by at least one know-it-all villager every year is where the chaos really begins. This is the original celebration that Halloween borrowed its spookiest traditions from. It's the end of the harvest, the beginning of the dark half of the year, and a moment when every medieval peasant collectively decides, you know what? If the world's ending, we might as well throw something on the fire and see what happens. Picture yourself trudging through a muddy village lane under a sky so black it looks like the sun forgot you existed. There's a sharp chill in the air, but you can see the orange flicker of fire ahead. Tonight, the bonfire isn't just for warmth. It's a blazing insurance policy against everything that goes bump, howl, or moan in the night. Every villager, from the smallest snot-nosed child to the crankiest old farmer, shuffles into the square clutching whatever meagre offerings they've managed to scrounge up, a shriveled beet, a chunk of bread, or if you're really fortunate, a slightly less mouldy turnip. The fire is massive, not roaster marshmallow massive, but sacrifice your eyebrow hair to the gods massive. The village elders, who all look suspiciously like they were carved out of ancient tree roots, lead the ritual with solemn faces and slightly singed cloaks. Offerings are tossed into the flames with little prayers. Keep my cows alive, let my son find a wife. Please, for the love of all things holy, let next year's oats grow better than this year's. It's both a celebration and a desperate negotiation with the universe. Why so nervous? Because tonight, according to legend, the boundaries between this world and the next are tissue paper thin. The dead, the fairies, and all sorts of otherworldly beings get a free pass to wander wherever they like. You could bump into a long-lost ancestor, a trickster spirit, or just your neighbour Thomas wearing half a sheep for warmth and looking more supernatural than usual. Everyone's jumpy. Everyone's watching the shadows, and the old folks keep muttering about omens, curses, and that time in '67 when someone forgot the bonfire and the chickens started laying square eggs. But the real showstopper tonight is the costumes, or as much as costume can describe whatever you manage to glue, tie, or drape over yourself in the dark. Forget plastic fangs and store-bought masks. The tradition is to don animal skins, horns, and whatever bits of fur you can beg, borrow, or steal from your livestock. Some claim it's to confuse the spirits. If you look like a goat, maybe a wandering ghost will skip your house and go bother Gerald instead. In practice, it's mostly an excuse for the villagers to unleash their inner chaos gremlin and walk around mooing, clucking, or snorting at each other until someone laughs hard enough to forget the existential dread. Kids get in on the action too. They smear soot on their faces, tie brambles in their hair, and try to out-scare each other with impromptu shrieks and genuinely concerning cackles. If you're especially brave, you might sneak off with your friends to the edge of the woods and dare each other to call out to the spirits. Just don't let your mother catch you, or you'll get a lecture about not inviting the fair folk in for tea. As the fire blazes on, the atmosphere is part festival, part panic attack. There's music, lutes, drums, and some frantic clapping. There's dancing, usually in circles, because no one trusts straight lines after dark. The food is simple but hearty. Oatcakes, roasted apples, and enough mead to warm your bones and lower your standards for what counts as a good time. If you're fortunate, you might catch a glimpse of someone's homemade goat costume, usually just a sheepskin draped over questionable undergarments and a pair of sticks tied to your head. You've never seen anything less intimidating or more hilarious. By midnight, the fire is roaring, everyone's faces are red from smoke, and the line between fear and fun has completely blurred. You're not sure if you're hiding from ghosts, channeling them, or just happy to have survived another year. That's Samhain. A bonfire, a shiver of fear, and a goat costume that you'll never quite live down. Tonight's feast is a masterclass in medieval culinary anxiety. You've got soul cakes, a cross between bread, a cookie, and an existential threat. Roasted root vegetables, and maybe a single suspicious apple. Each bite is meant to keep spirits at bay and possibly to test your digestive system's commitment to survival. Let's begin with the main event, soul cakes. These little round buns are the medieval answer to fun-size candy bars, only with less chocolate and more unresolved theological questions. The concept is simple. On All Hallows Eve and the days that follow, villagers bake batches of soul cakes, fill them with currants if they're feeling extravagant, and mark the tops with a cross. Then, instead of eating them all themselves like any modern sugar addict, they give them out to children, beggars, and anyone who comes knocking on the door, promising to say a prayer for your dearly departed. In theory, each cake equals one soul lifted a little closer to heaven. In practice, it's mostly a way to offload stale bread and feel mildly superior. But soul cakes are just the beginning. Halloween in the Middle Ages is basically a potluck dinner, where the theme is use it or lose it. The harvest is over, winter is approaching, and everything in your pantry is a few days away from becoming a science experiment. If you've got cabbages, onions, leeks, or turnips, congratulations. You're the proud host of tonight's buffet. Most dishes are roasted over the communal bonfire, which means everything tastes faintly of smoke and whatever Gerald dropped into the ashes when no one was looking. The centrepiece, root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, and the occasional rutabaga. These are peeled if you're fancy, chopped, tossed in a bit of animal fat, and roasted until they're soft enough to eat with the 5 remaining teeth you've got. Sometimes, for extra flavour, you add herbs or a scrap of dried meat. More often, you just pretend everything is fine. Food is communal. Platters passed around, fingers grabbing whatever looks least likely to bite back. Cutlery is rare. Napkins are a fantasy. If you drop it, the 3-second rule is extended indefinitely unless a chicken gets to it first. And then there's the bread. Dense, dark, and slightly sour. Medieval bread is the stuff of legend, usually because it's so heavy it could legally be classified as a weapon. The loaves tonight are extra special, sometimes baked with dried fruit, nuts, or honey. If your harvest was good, or if you're on suspiciously good terms with the local miller, every bite is a reminder that gluten sensitivity is a modern luxury. For the fortunate or those recently back from a successful poaching expedition, there might be some meat on the table, a sliver of bacon, a rabbit stewed with onions, or a pigeon that's seen better days. Salted fish is another staple, though you'll want to avoid eye contact with it if you hope to keep your appetite. Cheese, if it appears at all, is firm, sharp, and just pungent enough to remind you it was once a living thing. Of course, you need something to wash it all down. Water is basically a death sentence. So you're drinking weak ale or cider, children included. The mead, made from whatever wild honey the bees haven't weaponized, is reserved for special toasts or that one uncle who's already asleep by the fire. Dessert? Well, if you count an apple baked in the embers until it explodes as dessert, you're in luck. Sweets are rare, but nuts, especially hazelnuts and walnuts, are tossed in the fire, cracked and eaten by the handful. Sometimes dried fruits make an appearance, usually chewier than a blacksmith's shoe, but sweet enough to make you forget that sugar is more expensive than your neighbour's entire house. The food isn't just about calories. It's about ritual, sharing, offering, praying. Every bite connects you to your ancestors and, more importantly, gives you one last taste of warmth before winter sets in. So tonight, eat heartily. Toast the living and the dead. And remember, if you survive the meal, you've already beaten the odds. In medieval Europe, night is not a time for romance, poetry or stargazing. It's more like a mandatory game of Don't Get Cursed, played in total darkness, with bonus points for surviving until sunrise. Unlike today, where you can flip on a light with a switch and feel safe under your security system's unblinking blue LED, the average medieval villager faced nighttime with all the joy and optimism of someone heading into tax season with a broken quill and a suspicious rash. First, there's the simple fact that dark is really, really dark. No streetlights, no glowing smartphones, no convenient night lights unless you count the embers in the hearth, and those are fiercely guarded, like the last slice of cake at a family reunion. Candles are expensive and reserved for emergencies, like if you need to read scripture, deliver a baby, or hunt for the rat that just ran across your face. Most nights, you squint into the void, trying to tell the difference between your cousin's snoring and a ghost preparing to collect old grudges. And about those ghosts, for a medieval person, the world is teeming with spirits, curses, and things that go whoops in the night. Every unexplained breeze is a phantom. Every shadow in the corner might be the soul of someone you forgot to pray for. Or worse, a neighbour back from the grave to ask why you still haven't returned that spade. The local priest insists the saints are watching, but everyone knows that the saints clock out at sundown, and after that you're on your own. You cross yourself so often that your right shoulder develops more muscle than your left. Then there are the animals. In modern horror, it's always wolves or bats. In medieval reality, you're just as likely to be terrified by a hedgehog rustling in the leaves, a barn owl screeching like a toddler possessed, or a stray cow breaking wind. In the next field over, there's a chorus of livestock noises echoing through the hamlet, and every single one sounds vaguely supernatural. After the third mug of ale, if you do hear a wolf, congratulations. You get to spend the night trying to remember which family member runs slowest, but the real danger is much closer to home. Medieval villages are tight-knit, but that's mostly because no one can afford to live more than 30 feet apart. Privacy doesn't exist. Doors are unlocked not because of trust, but because the only thing worth stealing is the smell. Gossip is the main form of entertainment, and also the local security system. If your neighbour Agnes so much as coughs at midnight, the entire village will know by dawn, and someone will blame it on witchcraft, the weather, or her questionable taste in onions. Paranoia is a way of life. You don't just fear the supernatural, you fear the natural. Too bad blood between neighbours simmers under the surface, coming out at night in the form of mysterious noises, missing chickens, and the odd mud missile launched through a window. If you're a stranger in the village, you might as well tattoo suspicious on your forehead. Every unknown visitor after dark is assumed to be a thief, a murderer, or worst of all, a tax collector. It's a community, sure, but it's also a standoff, so you bar the door with a stick. That's mostly for show. Whisper a prayer to every saint you can remember, and lie awake listening to the world conspire. Outside, somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots, a dog barks, and your stomach growls in a way that could definitely be mistaken for a banshee if you weren't careful. The night stretches on, heavy and full of secrets, as you hope desperately that the only thing that visits you is sleep. Because in the medieval night you fear not only what you can't see, but what you know all too well. Forget Netflix or TikTok on Halloween. In medieval Europe, your prime entertainment is the ancient art of scaring yourself and your entire family silly with ghost stories by candlelight. You don't have surround sound or a jump scare algorithm. What you have is a handful of rushlights, a room full of nervous relatives, and the collective memory of every weird thing that's ever happened in the village. You settle in for the evening, huddled near the hearth, all hoping that this year the tales are only slightly less traumatizing than last year's, and that the only thing you'll lose sleep over is the draft under the door. The rules of medieval ghost storytelling are simple. First, the room must be dim. The fewer candles, the better. Rushlights sputter and smoke, filling the hut with shadows and just enough light to see the whites of everyone's eyes. The children are sent to fetch firewood, not because anyone actually needs more, but so the adults can lower their voices, throw in some extra details and practice their creepiest delivery. If someone outside hears you, good. That's just free advertising for your haunted family brand. You start, naturally, with local legends. Every settlement has at least one. The restless ploughman who walks the fields at night, searching for the ox he lost in the great flood of '49. Or the weeping maiden who stands by the old millstone, her cries mingling with the wind. The best stories are close to home, tied to places you pass every day. The point isn't just to scare, it's to make every dark corner and unfamiliar sound after sunset feel personal. Suddenly, every creek, lane and garden gate is a potential portal to the afterlife. You've also got tales of wandering spirits, the so-called revenants who rise from their graves on All Hallows' Eve, hungry for a meal, a memory, or just someone to acknowledge that their burial wasn't up to code. These ghosts aren't subtle. They bang on windows, howl through keyholes, and move tools around just enough to make you question your sanity. Occasionally, you throw in a story about a phantom monk who appears in the churchyard, warning anyone who listens to stop singing off-key at Mass. Or else. No ghost story is complete without a good curse. Maybe it's the tale of the old woman who refused to give her last loaf to a hungry stranger, only to be haunted every night by shadowy figures and mysterious knocks. Or the man who laughed at the idea of witches, only to wake up with his hair braided and his chickens laying black eggs. Every story is a lesson. Be kind to travellers. Never mock the supernatural, and always keep a clove of garlic in your shoe, just in case. Naturally, these tales get more elaborate as the night goes on and the mead disappears. Someone's uncle once saw a horse, with eyes like lanterns. Another claims their grandfather met the devil himself, who offered a deal on cheese, but only if he'd never tell the recipe. By midnight, you're not sure whether you're more afraid of the dead or your family's creative storytelling. Kids, of course, pretend to be unfazed, but you notice them inching closer to the adults. Even the bravest adults secretly clutch their amulets or cross themselves just a little more than usual. Someone's always left jumping at the sound of the wind or accusing their little brother of poking them with a stick. Eventually, as the fire dies down and the candles flicker, everyone heads to bed, replaying the stories in their minds. You tuck your feet in tight just in case anything tries to grab them. Sleep comes, but not before you promise yourself that next year you'll just tell stories about heroic turnips or lost sheep. But you know you won't, because nothing beats a good ghost story, especially when all you have to keep out the darkness is a smoky candle and the hope that the dead prefer someone else's house. You don't have a Spirit Halloween superstore, and no one's scrolling Pinterest for last-minute ideas. Tonight, in your muddy medieval village, a costume is anything you can find that's not currently attached to a living animal or a family member. The goal isn't to look glamorous or clever. The goal is to scare off the dead, confuse the living, and maybe, just maybe, disguise yourself from whatever spirit is holding a grudge about last year's turnip incident. You start by rummaging through the family chest, which mostly holds disappointment, spare twine, and that one shirt you only wear for funerals. If you're fortunate, you'll find a tattered bit of sheepskin or some ancient crusty cloak that smells like both feet and secrets. The best medieval costumes rely on creative panic and a willingness to accept that dignity is overrated. Want to look like a lost soul wandering the earth? Drape yourself in an old flour sack, tie some dead weeds around your waist and rub soot on your face until your own dog barks at you. Animal disguises are all the rage for reasons both mystical and practical. The thinking goes, if you wear the head or hide of a beast, you might trick vengeful spirits into leaving you alone. The reality is, you'll trick everyone else into keeping their distance too, which is basically the dream. Tonight, half the village is stomping around in clumsy hooves, ragged furs and cow horns strapped to their foreheads with string. You catch sight of yourself reflected in a puddle and think, wow, I look like I lost a fight with a scarecrow and a bucket of glue. Mission accomplished. Children are especially enthusiastic about looking terrifying, which is easy because medieval children are already covered in dirt, bruises, and questionable decisions. Some smear ashes on their cheeks, stick feathers in their hair, or fashion claws out of beetroot peels. If you see a gaggle of children running through the street, shrieking at each other and looking like miniature bog monsters, you know the costume contest is in full swing. The only real rule: the scarier, the better. If you can get Agnes the baker to scream and drop her bread, you win eternal bragging rights. Adults go all in too. Some men wrap themselves in bedsheets the one time a clean linen appears in public, and lurch around pretending to be the restless dead. Others try to become part of the darkness itself, smearing themselves with lampblack and skulking around corners. A favourite trick is to hollow out a turnip, no pumpkins here, and carve a grotesque face. Stick a tallow candle inside and carry it under your cloak for maximum jump scare potential. If you're caught without a disguise, you might just toss a cloak over your head and claim you're a mysterious traveller, a lost pilgrim, or someone who really hates making eye contact. Face coverings are generally only for those with the talent and hours to fashion something using strips of hide, tree bark, or perhaps even a dried pig's bladder if you're feeling brave. The outcome is constantly terrifying and completely out of style. Being trendy simply isn't an option. If your disguise causes babies to weep and old gentlemen to make the sign of the cross, you've succeeded. Just pray you don't need to take it off quickly, or you might find you finished the household adhesive and are stuck until the holidays. By morning, nobody can recall who anyone was. And that's exactly the whole point. Attire makes the difference between person and phantom, ally and unknown, disappear. You get to inhabit another being or thing for a couple of chilly, smoke-filled hours. As the blaze dwindles and everyone removes their facade, you're left with the sheer pleasure of just being yourself again. Until next autumn at least, when you'll be back in the dirt, hunting for the ideal root vegetable and the perfect excuse to terrify your neighbours. Your medieval town doesn't feature a doorbell. If you wish to visit someone, you pound on the entrance with a stick, your fist, or whatever is nearby, a goat on occasion. Tonight, you're not just dropping in on neighbours for idle talk. You're participating in soul caking. It's the ancestor of trick or treat, but with more religious content and fewer trips to the dentist. Here is how it functions. On All Hallows Eve and the following days, you and a crowd of friends, or possibly rivals, it's hard to tell in those masks, bundle up and journey from dwelling to dwelling. You perform songs, recite verses, and occasionally issue demands. The objective is straightforward. Receive a soul cake, a tiny circular pastry marked with a cross and about as sweet as existence gets in the Middle Ages, or possibly a piece of fruit, a portion of nuts, or a valuable rare coin. In return, you commit to saying a prayer for the souls of the deceased. It's a fair bargain. food energy for spiritual protection. Of course, this tradition begins with a tune, not a popular track or even a melodic hymn, but a somewhat dissonant chorus learned by every child ever persuaded with baked goods. Something like, a soul cake, please, good lady, a soul cake, repeated until someone yields, opens up, and hands over their goods. The words are half request, half warning. If you're fortunate, the homeowner will offer a cake and throw in a few dried apples. If you are not, you receive a serious reprimand about speaking softly and the need for reverence for your elders, both living and dead. Soul caking is open to all ages, although the most spirited participants are youngsters and the occasional adolescent desperate for additional sustenance before winter. There is an element of planning involved too. The best places have the softest cakes, the most generous portions, or according to legend, a secret hoard of actual honey cakes reserved only for the most tenacious or well-connected singers. By the time you reach the end of the road, your throat is raw from singing, your container is full of somewhat stale bread, and you have offered so many prayers you have probably reduced your extended family's time in purgatory by half a year. The trick element of trick-or-treating is slightly different here. If you are denied a soul cake, you do not vandalize the house or toilet paper the trees. For one, you do not have eggs to waste, and that paper has not been invented yet. Instead, the local form of mischief is more medieval. Perhaps you leave a root vegetable on the porch. Perhaps you chant a particularly grim stanza about the destiny of uncharitable spirits in the next life. Perhaps, if you are truly daring, you move a few logs of firewood or conceal someone's footwear in the underbrush. It's all light-hearted fun, but everyone understands that being an ungenerous host on All Hallows' Eve is inviting a year of misfortune and somewhat possessed oatmeal. There is a community benefit to it as well. Soul caking is not only about obtaining free food, it's a rite of charity, modesty, and social strengthening. The cakes you distribute are not just for the living, they are for the departed. Each offering is a small, sweet connection for a soul in temporary residence. Every door you rap on is another tie to people who, for the rest of the year, might only talk when arguing over livestock, or the proper usage of shared mud. As you slowly head back to your place, face cold and basket filled, you feel an odd contentment. You have nourished your stomach and your conscience, kept the town's spectres calm, and guaranteed another year of collective goodwill. You may not have chocolate bars or giant treats, but you have what is truly important: a full belly, a lighter spirit, and just enough cake left to share with the living. Or, if you are superstitious, to set on the ledge for guests from the unknown. The main focus tonight is not some lavish medieval dessert or a meticulously choreographed dance. It is a worn wooden cask, 12 somewhat damaged apples, and the type of activity that perfectly combines embarrassment with the genuine chance of drowning in 3 inches of cool water. Welcome to Bobbing for Apples, medieval style. The original parlour game for people who can't afford decks of cards and believe catching a cold builds character. Here is how the event unfolds. The barrel is rolled out to the town square, spilling its contents suspiciously, since it has been used for everything from fermented juice to washing clothes to, at least once, moving a goose with trust issues. Someone pours water into it halfway from the well, which is cold enough to make you regret every decision that led to this evening. Then a dozen apples, gathered if you're lucky, found if you're not, are dropped in, floating on the surface like innocent small reminders of the unpredictability of medieval plumbing. The rules are wonderfully straightforward. You bend down, hands behind your back. No cheating, Agnes, we all remember last year, and you plunge your face into the frigid water. The goal is to bite an apple before you run out of air or self-respect, whichever happens first. For those watching, it's the funniest entertainment of the season. For the participants, it's somewhere between a test of stamina and a public health hazard. There is a technique, naturally. Some contestants opt for the quick, forceful dive, emerging with an apple firmly held in their teeth and triumph in their eyes. Others bob gently, pushing apples with their noses before realizing the only thing they have managed to capture is a mouthful of someone else's saliva. The most unfortunate participant inevitably tips the barrel over, flooding the town square and guaranteeing that everyone's feet are both soaked and eerie for the remainder of the evening. Naturally, children love it. There is laughter, shouting, and the occasional outburst of tears when someone accidentally gets a noseful of water. Adults pretend to participate just for amusement, but really they're attempting to demonstrate that years of difficult living have provided them with the jaw strength of a champion donkey. The local strongman claims he can grab 2 apples at once until he almost swallows a small creature and spends the rest of the night dramatically coughing near the roaring fire. And let's not even discuss cleanliness. Medieval villagers are a resilient group, but even they realise the barrel is more a mix of human germs than a sterile container. By the time the game concludes, the water is speckled with hay, hair, and mysterious particles that no one wants to admit to. If you are fortunate, you leave with nothing worse than a stiff neck and the reassurance that your immune system has been put through its paces. If you are not, you might find out the next day that the true trick of the holiday is, congratulations, you have caught Gerald's illness. Bobbing for apples is more than just a diversion. It is a test of fate, a sign of bravery, and a shared experience in ignoring germs. And somehow it is all connected to the idea of predicting the future. Medieval stories suggest that if you manage to grab an apple on your very first attempt, you will be married within the next year. If your apple slips away, you can look forward to another 12 months of being single and increasingly pointed inquiries from your grandmother. So, as the final apple is pulled out and the barrel is turned over to wash itself in the lane, you wipe your face on your sleeve and accept your reward. A slightly bruised apple and a story to tell. Maybe you achieved victory. Maybe you just survived. Either way, you took part in one of the most unusual, wettest and memorable customs of the medieval Halloween season. And as you depart, water streaming down your chin, you know that next year you will queue up to plunge your head again. Because it is ridiculous, and it is a tradition. And honestly, nothing says community bonding quite like the taste of panic and fruit skins. You probably consider Halloween a night when anything is permitted. Practical jokes, dressing up, public fruit dipping. But imagine the surprise on your dirty, cold medieval face when you discover that yes, at various points, the holiday itself could be banned. Nothing ruins the atmosphere of a good ghost story like a serious-looking official informing you that the celebration is cancelled for the foreseeable future. It begins, as so many medieval difficulties do, with religious authority. By now, you have made it through harvest time bonfires, demanding soul cakes, and the yearly Who Wore It Best animal skin costume competition. You would think you have earned one innocent night of firelight and questionable treats. But the powerful, both civil and spiritual, occasionally have a different perspective. All those huge fires, masks and loud gatherings look suspiciously like pagan rituals, which, to be honest, they are. And if there is one thing the medieval religious establishment dislikes, it is people appearing to enjoy unsanctioned entertainment. So here comes the official declaration. Perhaps it is nailed to the church door. Perhaps it is announced loudly by the town crier. Perhaps it is just whispered by someone who claims to have inside information. No more large fires. No more walking around after darkness falls in outfits that make you look like you escaped the farm animals. No more public singing. Unless, of course, you are singing hymns. Halloween, in the way you understand it, is formally forbidden. It is for your own safety, obviously. Also, the local priest is tired of being kept awake all night by children loudly asking for soul cakes beneath his window. Naturally, this prevents no one. If anything, it just makes Halloween even more appealing. There is a simple rule. The minute you inform a village they cannot have their festival, they will immediately begin planning ways to do it, twice as enthusiastically and 3 times as secretly. The large fires are moved out of sight by the riverbank or deep into the forest. Costumes become less obvious, at least until someone gets creative and transforms a sheep's bladder into a mask. The annual procession is now a sudden, shared walk, and soul caking is reclassified as a door-to-door request for prayers. The best customs do not disappear, they simply become hidden. But there is a new feeling now. Instead of open celebration, there is a feeling of delicious conspiracy. Every flickering flame behind a closed window, every fragment of song carried on the breeze, feels like a small act of defiance. Children become expert lookouts, prepared to scatter at the sound of approaching steps. Adults exchange subtle gestures as they discreetly offer additional bread to the singing youngsters. If you are caught, you plead ignorance. No, Father, I was merely examining my new firewood. The costumes are for scaring away large wild animals. The singing is definitely about some saint or another. Still, the authorities occasionally intervene. If you are particularly unlucky, your village might receive a visit from an overly dedicated official, a man whose greatest pleasure is extinguishing flames, both literal and figurative. The penalty for illegal Halloween activities varies. Sometimes it is a monetary penalty, sometimes a night in the public stocks, sometimes a particularly strong reprimand about the dangers of pagan practices and the destiny of your eternal spirit. In the worst scenarios, repeat offenders are publicly criticised in front of the whole community, an ironic situation since everyone was probably at the illegal bonfire anyway. Yet somehow, every year, Halloween continues. The old legends are shared a little more quietly, the cakes are exchanged a little more secretly, and the bonfires, as prohibited as they may be, are reignited the moment nobody is watching. Because no matter how many rules are created, the desire for a little bit of disorder, a little bit of joy, and a little bit of connection with the mysterious unknown is more powerful than any law. So as you quietly bring a smoking branch back home and dust the ash off your goatskin cloak, you realise that sometimes the most enjoyable part of Halloween is knowing you shouldn't be celebrating at all, and that perhaps is the oldest custom of all. Doing precisely what you were told not to, under the watchful gaze of the moon, and enjoying every forbidden second of it. If you think modern Halloween is filled with exaggerated costumes and sensationalized horror, just wait until you step into a medieval village on All Hallows Eve. Tonight, you're not just avoiding children armed with sticky fruit. You are also navigating a world of enchantresses, misfortune, and the type of bad luck that can be attributed to common vegetables. Let's begin with witches. In the medieval view, a witch is not some green-skinned cartoon figure laughing over a boiling pot. She is more likely to be your neighbour, the one who knows too much about medicinal plants or has a slightly unnerving way of looking at your crops. The definition of a witch is unclear. One day, it's Agnes who talks to her pet feline. The next, it's Edith who can knit a sock without dropping a stitch. On Halloween, suspicion is high. The division between this reality and the next is fragile, and any woman, or occasionally a daring man, with a touch of mystery or the wrong kind of headwear, is an ideal target for accusations. Of course, making accusations is practically a pastime. Did your bread dough fail to rise? Clearly magic. Did your cow stop producing milk? Undoubtedly the result of an evil spell. Find a small amphibian in your sleeping area. That is not just Gerald playing tricks again, it is dark sorcery, obviously. In the highly dramatic theatre of medieval village existence, anything even slightly unfortunate can be blamed on someone with occult tendencies and an abundance of fragrant herbs. Tonight, as you navigate the celebrations, you keep a cautious eye out for bad omens. The air is full of signs. If you spill table salt, you are destined for trouble. If a black cat crosses your path, abandon your plans. If you neglect to say a blessing when someone sneezes, well, you should start planning for the inevitable. The best defence is a precaution. Sprinkle salt at your entry, hang an iron key above your door, and if you are especially worried, keep a piece of garlic in your sock. You may not smell very nice, but at least the curses might bounce off you and onto Gerald, who definitely deserves it. And then there are the root vegetables. Modern Halloween offers you the cheerful glowing gourd. Medieval Halloween gives you its grumpy cousin, the humble, ill-fated turnip. These root vegetables are everywhere, carved into grotesque small faces, hollowed out and containing small flames and placed in windows to repel spirits. Theoretically, they are meant to keep witches and ghosts away. In reality, they are more likely to trip you in the darkness or roll threateningly into your path, just as you are certain you saw a phantom near the chicken coop. Some people insist that these vegetables bring misfortune. Perhaps it's because they appear so knotted and human once carved. Perhaps it's because you always forget to dig one up and discover it rotting in the field just in time for someone to gesture and declare, "A sign of a curse." Either way, you avoid the turnips, only interacting with them when absolutely necessary and always with a healthy sense of suspicion. The church, naturally, is not a supporter of all this witch and curse paranoia. The local priest spends the evening going from door to door, sprinkling holy water and cautioning against silly beliefs. His advice? Pray often, worry less, and definitely do not allow Agnes to organise the soul cake rotation this year. But deep down, everyone knows that a little bit of superstition keeps the long night interesting and gives you someone to blame when the pastry crust burns. By the close of the evening, you have managed to avoid the worst spells, greeted every suspected witch politely, and only stumbled over 3 turnips. You hang a sprig of rosemary above your bed, whisper a prayer for good fortune, and promise yourself that next year you will just remain indoors. But you will not, because Halloween is about engaging with the mysterious, even if it involves avoiding a spell or two and facing the business end of a very unlucky vegetable. Let's be clear about one thing. In the Middle Ages, you do not have to venture far to discover a haunted residence. You are already living in it. Your dwelling is the very embodiment of atmosphere, which is another way of saying chilly, full of drafts, and constantly somewhat damp. If contemporary haunted houses are filled with cobwebs and fake skeletons, yours comes pre-equipped with the genuine article, or at least something scurrying under the floorboards that has not been seen since last spring. First, there is the appearance and atmosphere. Your home is a single space constructed of timber, woven branches and mud, and whatever else you could convince your neighbours to help you carry from the woods. There's a hole in the ceiling to release the smoke and let in the precipitation, the flying creatures, and any spirits who feel like stopping by for a conversation. The floor is dirt, perhaps covered with straw if you are lucky, or whatever is left of last year's floor coverings if you are not. Every step is a soft grinding noise or a squelch, depending on the time of year. Let's discuss the sounds. The wind howls through the walls, shaking the shutters and causing the door to groan at precisely the most unsettling moment. If it is not the wind, it is the local rodents staging what sounds like a mock battle in the roof beams. The wood structure makes popping noises, the fire crackles, and every so often something heavy thuds in the gloom. Is it a ghost, a thief, or just Gerald sleepwalking again and looking for his missing footwear? You can never be certain, which is half the fun and all of the anxiety. The smell is complex. Imagine scents of slowly burning wood, aged dairy product, wet fibre, and a trace of animal. Every corner holds a different scent, none of which can be found in a candle store, unless you are buying your old medieval odor mystery. And yet, after a few seasons, you cease to notice, except when a guest arrives and tries very hard to breathe through their mouth. The lighting is another challenge. At night, you depend on the central fire, a candle if you are feeling extravagant, or an occasional lamp if you have not sold it for food. Shadows crawl up the vertical surfaces, transforming your own coat into a menacing figure, and your neighbour's handiwork into something with far too many appendages. The flickering firelight turns every person's face into a mask of darkness and orange colour, and you find yourself looking sideways at the feline, just to ensure it has not developed an extra head. Every haunted dwelling requires a history, and yours is no different. There is the story of the previous occupant who vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind only a partially chewed shoe and a lasting feeling of Don't look under the sleeping platform. There are stories about the section of the room that consistently remains cold, no matter how often you seal the drafts or pile on straw. The children of the village challenge each other to knock on your door after the sun sets, convinced that a ghost or at least a very angry fowl will answer. Even your furniture contributes to the atmosphere. The bed is uneven and always seems to sink toward the middle, as if it is trying to consume you whole. The table is unstable, no matter how you support it, and the single chair is only slightly less eerie than the rest of the dwelling. If you own a container, it squeaks. If you own a storage unit, it shakes. No one in the village trusts a piece of furniture that does not produce a strange noise at least once each night. Yet for all its eccentricities, your haunted house is your sanctuary. You are familiar with every small sound and moan, every suspicious mark and unexplained gust of air. It is not ideal, it is not even dry, but it is where you endure the struggles, both genuine and supernatural. And as you tightly wrap your covering and hope the wind is the only thing knocking tonight, you realise that in the Middle Ages, every house is haunted. And that is exactly the way you prefer it. If you believe social networking is a recent invention, you have clearly never stood around a medieval village bonfire on Halloween night. Sure, you cannot give a like to someone's ensemble with a tap, but you can praise their animal skin mask directly, which is the original form of an appreciation symbol. This fire is the warm, smoky, rumour-filled centre of your community, a gathering place where news is exchanged, reputations are established, and the local storyteller tries and fails to launch the village's next popular song. As the sun disappears and the coldness sets in, everyone moves toward the crackling flames in the centre of the common area. It is a huge fire, so large that you sometimes wonder if it is meant to ward off spirits or just give everyone a chance to cook things you would not dare consume at home. You gather closely, being careful not to set fire to your only garment. The children are running in and out of the light, waving branches and pretending to be heroic figures, or if they are particularly mischievous, cursed root vegetables. This is where the true excitement occurs. The bonfire is the medieval bulletin board, gossip centre, dating service, and talent competition all combined. Want to announce a future marriage? Stand near the flames and say it loudly enough for 3 gossips to overhear. Searching for a missing goat? Describe it to your neighbour, and in 10 minutes, the entire village will be searching. Or if it is Gerald's goat, pretending they never saw it. If you are in the mood for an argument, wait for someone to mention last year's crop failure, or the strange disappearance of the village's only decent serving spoon. There is no privacy. Everything you say is public knowledge, and everything you do is subject to commentary. Did you drop your bread into the fire? 5 people will tease you about it until spring arrives. Did you wear the same costume as last year? Prepare to hear about it from everyone who is pretending they did not do the same thing. Here, reputation is everything, and laughter is the main way to pay. If you are not cautious, your embarrassing anecdote will be passed around faster than a basket of somewhat chunky burned nuts. The fire is also the performance area. Someone, usually the local poet or that one relative who is convinced he is funny, will start a song or a narrative. Perhaps it is a scary story about the haunted water source. Perhaps it is a humorous song about Agnes's attempt to change the colour of wool using vegetable dye. It did not go well. If you are lucky, there is music, stringed instruments, percussion, perhaps a loud woodwind instrument, all played with passion and varying degrees of competence. Everyone applauds, sings along and laughs, because what else is there to do? It is dark, it is cold, and the fire is the only thing protecting you from the overwhelming sadness of the coming winter. Sometimes the bonfire is the location of an impromptu dance. You hold hands with whoever is nearby, move in a circle around the flames, and hope no one notices how many toes get stepped on. Should things turn truly chaotic, someone might try to leap over the flames, a decision that rarely goes well but certainly creates a lasting anecdote for the next year's get-together. Naturally, The bonfire is also the place where hushed admissions are made, plans are laid out, and romantic interests either blossom or fade. By the time the burning logs dwindle to embers, everyone holds a little more understanding of their neighbours than they did when the sun set, sometimes far more insight than they wished for. You eventually wander back home, your hair smelling of smoke, your ears ringing from the noisy cheer, and your spirit just a bit lighter from the shared experience. Ultimately, the village bonfire serves as more than simply a source of heat. It is the vital core of Halloween, where anxieties are burned away, personal histories are created, and everyone for a handful of fleeting bright hours is part of something greater than themselves. The world may be shadowed, but for tonight at least you possess the fire and all the narratives that accompany it. In a time without craft supply stores, costume shops, or even a dependable pair of cutting tools, crafting a truly frightening Halloween mask in the Middle Ages becomes a genuine examination of imagination, resourcefulness, and a willingness to endure strange glances from your farm animals. If you wish to make an impact at the evening's celebrations, or at least avoid recognition by the vengeful phantom of Old Man Elfric, it is time for some medieval do-it-yourself work that is more a tactic for survival than an artistic project. Begin by gathering materials. The most logical place to seek inspiration is the storage shed. Animal skulls are the original signature accessory. That sheep that met an untimely end last spring, congratulations. Its head now takes centre stage in your Halloween outfit. Once carefully cleaned, well, mostly, it is fastened over your own head using strands of rope, scraps of leather, or, for a more minimalist look, last year's shoelaces. The resulting look is equally alarming and puzzling. Is that an ethereal figure in a mask by the fire? Or is it simply Gerald finally finding a constructive use for his unsuccessful sheep-herding attempts? However, perhaps you aren't keen on smelling like old bones all evening. That's fine. There are many other choices. Pieces of leather torn from your own footwear or exchanged for goods from the tanner can be shaped into a mask guaranteed to scare small children, household pets, and at least one unfortunate fowl. Some more ambitious community members carve frightening visages into tree bark or tie reeds together, always being careful to puncture enough openings for sight and, if possible, for rapid, panicked breathing. Pigments and colouring agents are an entirely different matter. Forget about small, tidy containers of paint or adhesive with sparkles. Medieval mask creators utilise whatever is accessible: residue from the fire, berry juice, or even moist dirt, if nothing else presents itself. A smudge of ash on the cheek, a streak of beet juice beneath the eyes, and instantly you transform from a somewhat weary labourer to a phantom of the haunted marshes. For a finishing detail, secure a sprig of wilting plants or a few drooping feathers. This functions as half a protective charm, half an unintentional side dish. Masks are not just decorative, though. They fulfill a crucial function: to confuse roaming spirits and any real-world adversaries who might still hold resentment from last year's bread mishap. The theory is, if a ghost cannot identify you, it cannot haunt you. If Gerald cannot identify you, he cannot ask to borrow your axe again. It's a complete success. Children also join in on the action. They use whatever they discover: scraps of fabric, a squirrel hide, the occasional root vegetable with a crude face carved into it. The outcomes are often terrifying, but no one is judging. If anything, the objective is to appear as outlandish as possible. There is always at least one child who succeeds in combining sheep bones, burnt potato, and what remains of someone's church attire to such a startling degree that even the parish priest nervously makes the sign of the cross twice. Of course, not everyone is naturally gifted with an artist's skill. Sometimes, in the rush of last-minute preparations, you end up with something that is less a spirit-frightening menace and more a misshapen owl experiencing a difficult day. But that is the charm of medieval crafting. No one is keeping a detailed tally, and if your mask starts to disintegrate partway through the evening, you can simply claim it was a conscious effort to appear in the middle of a supernatural change. After all, the masks are as much about enjoyment as they are about fear. Beneath the bone, leather and plant material, everyone already knows each other's deepest secrets. The disguise simply grants you permission to behave a little more daringly, laugh a little more loudly, and, if you are discreet, secretly take an extra spiced cake from the shared table. By the time the clock strikes 12, the fire is scattered with discarded rope, feathers and the occasional deer horn. The masks are taken off, faces are cleaned with cool water and rough fabric, and everyone agrees, until the following year at least, that next time they will begin constructing their costume a few days sooner. Ultimately, medieval homemade masks are less concerned with flawless execution and more with active participation. You become part of the festivities, scare a few acquaintances, and remind the village spirits that, for one night, humans can be every bit as alarming as anything originating from the other dimension. If there's one thing medieval communities excel at, it's a deep belief in superstitions. On this Halloween evening, your small village becomes a living catalogue of foreboding practices, murmured warnings, and just-in-case routines. Forget about the modern lucky charm or the fear associated with Friday the 13th. Here, remaining alive is less dependent on logical reasoning and more on learning a lengthy list of necessary actions and prohibitions that might possibly ensure you survive until the sun rises. Begin with your main entrance. No one leaves it unlatched tonight. Not merely because of the cold air, though that is reason enough, but because you cannot be sure what is lingering outside. Spirits appreciate an unguarded entrance, so you hang a bundle of dried herbs, rosemary, sage, and, if you are affluent, lavender over the doorframe. Some inhabitants go a step further and secure an iron key or a horseshoe next to the door. Their rationale: ghosts despise metal, particularly when it is rusted and likely to cause a serious infection. Then there is the issue of crossing the threshold. Step inside with your right foot first. The left foot? Do not even consider it. The local folk belief maintains that starting with the incorrect foot invites misfortune, sickness, poor luck, or an appearance from that one long-gone relative who never learned to politely knock. And whatever you do, avoid letting a black cat cross your path on Halloween. If it occurs, you are advised to spin in a circle 3 times, spit over your shoulder, and quietly say a prayer to St. Felix, the patron of "Please do not let me be transformed into a frog this year." And windows represent another vulnerable area. You securely latch them, not just to keep the cold out, but to prevent wandering souls from drifting inside and rearranging your household items, just to be mischievous. To be perfectly certain, you place a candle in the window opening. This serves a dual purpose: to illuminate the route for benevolent spirits and to alert the malevolent ones that you are aware of their tricks. If your candle flickers rapidly or extinguishes, it is a clear indication that something is observing you, or perhaps you simply need a better quality of wax. Regardless, it offers a point of discussion. The looking glass, meanwhile, is absolutely forbidden. Gazing into a mirror at the moment of midnight is rumoured to attract disaster. You might witness your future, your own impending death, or worst of all, Gerald lurking behind you, ready to ask to borrow your outer garment. To ensure safety, you cover every reflective surface with cloth, even if it results in you stumbling blindly through your own dwelling and tripping over a root vegetable in the darkness. Food also receives the superstitious treatment. You set aside a small portion of your evening meal for the spirits, leaving a small plate on the table, a crust of baked bread on the fireplace ledge, or a sip of fermented apple drink near the entrance. This is not an act of kindness. It is an offer of appeasement. The unspoken message is, please accept this offering and leave the rest of my family in peace, and do not dare to speak negatively of those who have passed away tonight. If you do, You might awaken tomorrow with unexplained bruises, missing footwear, or the sudden unsettling ability to speak sophisticated Latin. And then there is the matter of specific words. You avoid uttering the term fairy. It is too risky. You refer to them as the kind neighbours or the good people. Similarly, never openly compliment an infant or a newborn animal, lest you attract the evil eye. Spit on the ground, rap your knuckles on wood, and quickly offer a prayer for added protection. As the time approaches midnight, the protective rituals become more intense. You fasten bright red ribbons to your farm animals, place protective amulets beneath your pillow, and inspect the room corners for unseen dangers. You sleep fitfully, knowing that a single forgotten belief is a direct invitation to catastrophe. By the time the sun rises, you have survived, not by logical means, but by a sheer determined faith in customs older than the village itself. You welcome the morning light, feeling exhausted but successful. In a world where luck and destiny seem like next-door neighbours, Halloween superstitions are your protective barrier, and sometimes, defying all reasonable expectation, they just might prove effective. As the central fire decreases and the night turns menacing, you recognise that Halloween is not solely about startling your neighbours or offering small children a bribe of hard, slightly scorched baked goods. It is also a time for remembering the dead, your own lost family, theirs, and anyone who might be passing through the community for one more evening. In the medieval way of thinking, tonight represents a convergence. The living and the deceased share a single world, if only for a few hours. And if you intend to make it through the night, a measure of respect is necessary. This is the moment the formal prayers commence. It begins with the heavy sound of the church bell, a deep, mournful tone that somehow manages to resonate even in a small settlement with only 3 main structures and an excess of livestock. The priest steps out, his eyes strained from an equal mix of spiritual devotion and having just been awakened from his short rest, and gathers everyone in the central common area. You join the slowly moving group, clutching your outer garment tightly and carefully watching the shadows, because there is nothing quite like a community-wide prayer service to remind you of how many relatives you have unintentionally failed to mention by name. The prayers themselves are a blend of Latin phrases, local everyday language, and deeply sincere spontaneous additions. Officially, your purpose is to pray for the souls currently in the waiting area of purgatory, those departed who are not yet prepared for paradise and could benefit from a bit of assistance navigating the spiritual holding space. Unofficially, you are covering all possibilities, requesting protection from wandering spirits, and a complete pardon for any unintentional hexes you might have acquired since the last annual harvest. Candles are lit, their small flames flickering in the cold breeze, each one serving as a guiding light for a specific departed soul. Some individuals carry their lit candle the entire distance through the village, hoping to lead lost family members securely back to their former home. Others group theirs together in the churchyard, illuminating the burial sites with an eerie luminescence that is equally reassuring and unsettling. You attempt to avoid stumbling over any grave markers, but the profound darkness makes every small obstacle a potential hazard, including your own 2 feet, and then come the exhaustive lists. Every household brings a long list of names: ancestors, children lost too soon, that cousin who relocated to the next village and never sent a reply. The priest reads them out individually in a solemn voice that becomes slower and slower as the night progresses. The focus is less on exact accuracy and more on avoiding the accidental summoning of someone's angry deceased grandmother. If your family's name is omitted, it is considered a bad sign. People exchange worried whispers, light an additional candle, and silently hope the oversight does not mean you will be the next one haunting the storage barn by the following spring. You kneel down on the cold earth, repeating familiar prayers, some for the dead, some for good fortune, some simply to occupy the time until you can stand up without your knees, producing that distinct crunching noise. Even those who claim not to believe in ghosts participate. No one wants to be the single individual left unprotected when the spirits begin their visitations. The underlying reasoning is straightforward. If you demonstrate respect, the dead might reciprocate the kindness and leave your chickens undisturbed for another year. Of course, the prayers do not conclude with the official ceremony. As the darkness continues, you quietly offer additional invocations at your fireplace, in your sleeping quarters, and, for those who are truly anxious, in the outdoor toilet. You pray for loved ones, for lost animals, and for that one deeply embarrassing event involving a runaway goat and the miller's daughter. You promise better behaviour, offer up a small piece of old bread, and hope that tonight, at least, your dedicated efforts are sufficient. It is a strangely comforting ritual in a world where loss is a constant presence, and the unknown lingers just outside your wooden door. Remembering the dead is a method of retaining hope, of feeling the enduring structure of your family, even when some members are absent. You complete your prayers, extinguish your candle's flame, and climb into bed, hoping that you have appropriately honoured the dead, appeased the restless spirits, and secured a few more nights of tranquility for those who are living. And if you happen to dream tonight, may it be of your kind ancestors, pleasant spirits passing quickly without pausing, and the church bells sound safely ushering you into the new morning. In the medieval era, that is the closest you can hope to come to peace. In a world where scientific understanding has yet to make a profound impact and your most dependable defence against calamity is a simple precautionary measure, medieval villagers placed their absolute trust in rituals. Many of them. On Halloween night, the pressing need to keep away evil, sickness, and whatever else might sneak in after dark reaches its annual height. You are doing more than just lighting a large fire and securing your door. You are initiating a complete defensive campaign, equipped with a handful of common weeds, a small amount of salt, and enough protective trinkets to jingle when you move. Let us begin with various plants. Rosemary is used for recollection, sage for purification, and mugwort for, well, no one is entirely certain, but the village herbalist insists it provides protection. You suspend bundles of this material over the entrance, tuck individual sprigs beneath your pillow, and spread dried leaves in every room corner of your house. Your objective is protection, but the unintended result is that your home now smells exactly like an overcooked meat and vegetable dish garnished by a sleep-deprived plant collector. If anyone happens to sneeze, it is immediately taken as a positive sign. The herbs are clearly working. Then there is the element of fire. It is not exclusively for providing heat or for frightening away the occasional passing wolf. Fire is your most ancient and reliable defense line against things that make odd sounds, hiss, or softly moan in the darkness. You maintain a constant flame in the hearth, even if it means burning your last valuable piece of dry wood. Some families place small candles in every window opening, just enough light to remind spirits they are not welcome, but hopefully not enough to completely burn down the structure. The most daring individuals will even carry a glowing coal from the central bonfire back to their home fireplace, believing it will shield the household for another full year. If you stumble and drop it onto your only woven rug, well, that is a problem for the coming year. Now let us talk about protective charms. There is a booming small-scale industry dedicated to creating these protective items. Most are crudely made at home, and none include a guarantee. You might wear a necklace made of dried garlic bulbs, a small bag of salt suspended around your neck, or, if you are genuinely attempting to make an impact, a string of teeth gathered from animals that definitely succumbed to natural causes and not from you accidentally dozing off during your watch. Children become particularly creative. They use painted small rocks, intricately braided yarn wristbands, or the always popular button attached to a chicken feather for warding off frightening dreams and unrequested visits from Aunt Edith. Salt is universally seen as a cure. Sprinkle it across the door frame, the window ledges, and even within the bed sheets if you are concerned about spiritual bedbugs. The main drawback is waking up feeling stiff and gritty. Iron too is highly valued. If you possess an iron key, hang it close to the door. If not, any rusted nail will suffice. In an emergency, you can swiftly wave a cooking pot above your head and loudly declare yourself invulnerable to all curses. It may not prove effective, but it will certainly clear some room at the central fire. Naturally, everyone swears by their own unique technique. Some families insist their children wear their clothing inside out to baffle malevolent spirits. Others cleanse their hands in rainwater gathered from the roof's eastern slant because everyone understands spirits cannot tolerate a proper rinsing. And for the most deeply superstitious, a small bit of bread is left on the doorstep just in case, because no ghost can resist a late-night snack. As the night continues, you clatter with your amulets, reek of various herbs, and struggle to prevent your single candle from going out. There is a deep comfort in the repetition of the ritual, even if it is more tradition than actual effectiveness. You're not only safeguarding yourself, you are aligning with a long lineage of worried ancestors, all hoping to successfully navigate the darkest evening of the entire year. When the sun rises and the long shadows recede, you let out a relieved breath. Perhaps it was the herbs, the flickering fire, or simply a tenacious refusal to be defeated that kept the spirits at bay. In any case, you have successfully endured another medieval Halloween, and you have enough garlic hanging around your neck to repel spirits, vampires, and most of your extended family until the arrival of spring. Just when you believe you have successfully passed through the year's most terrifying night, avoiding curses, consuming a massive amount of soul cakes and sleeping with garlic tied around your neck, the sun appears on the first day of November. In the medieval perspective, this signifies that it is time to exchange your animal skin attire for your most presentable church tunic and slowly make your way back to the village centre for All Saints' Day. It is the quieter, more serious counterpart to Halloween. It is part holy tradition, part mandatory recovery from the previous night's drinking, and just a touch of spiritual disapproval from the local parish priest. The shift is jarring. Last night, you were screaming around the roaring fire, inventing new folk beliefs and trying to escape vengeful root vegetables. This morning, it is entirely about sweet-smelling incense, ringing bells, and the reassuring, steady repetition of church Latin. The local priest, who politely ignored last night's rowdiness, as long as no one set the burial ground on fire again, now stands prominently at the altar in his full ceremonial robes, ready to guide as many souls as possible to salvation before the midday meal. The church quickly becomes crowded as every family shuffles inside, looking exhausted, having dry throats and likely regretting at least half the pranks they executed the night before. The air inside is a complex, pleasant scent of old beeswax, damp floor straw, and whatever aromatic oil the priest believes will keep evil away. The stone walls are adorned with beautiful strings of dried flowers, and the occasional forgotten turnip lantern, now solemnly sprinkled with holy water and far less likely to summon anything beyond fond memories of the previous night. All Saints' Day is fundamentally about honouring the virtuous figures, the saints, the martyrs, and any other holy individual who managed to navigate life without being subjected to a curse from Gerald's elderly grandmother. The priest delivers a passionate sermon focused on the virtues demonstrated by the saints: patience, generosity, steadfastness, and the crucial ability to forgive acquaintances who pilfer your firewood. You are actively encouraged to pray for the saint's divine intervention, light a candle for your personal favourite, and generally conduct yourself as though you have not spent the last 12 hours fending off spirits with rotting onions and animal skulls. The church service itself is lengthy. It includes several readings from religious texts, detailed recitations of numerous saintly accomplishments, and just enough rhythmic chanting to lull even the most energetic child into a sleepy state. For some villagers, it is the most anticipated day of the year, a chance to wear their finest clothes, quietly share local gossip, and observe who is still noticeably limping from the previous night's unsuccessful jump over the bonfire. For others, it is an impressive display of sheer mental stamina. You kneel, then you stand, then you sit down again, and you make a concentrated effort not to visibly yawn directly in view of the altar. Of course, there is also food, but of a more sacred nature. Following the church service, families gather for a shared meal that feels like a well-deserved reward for all their spiritual commitment. The menu is a slightly improved version of last night's impromptu feast, better quality bread, perhaps a small portion of cheese, and if your prayers were especially powerful, a hint of sweet honey or a thin slice of preserved fish. There is a distinct feeling of relief that comes with consuming food in broad daylight, with all the ceremonial candles having been blessed and not a single ghost story being told. As the day progresses, the celebratory atmosphere returns, but thankfully without the presence of spirits, whether living or spectral. There are simple outdoor games for the children, more communal singing, the sacred kind this time, and a relaxing, much-needed period of rest in the afternoon sun. You might even catch a glimpse of the priest joining in, a rare smile appearing as he quietly commends the community for successfully enduring another year of spiritual and otherworldly chaos. By the time the sun goes down, All Saints' Day has completed its soothing effect. The entire village feels perceptibly lighter. The long shadows are no longer quite so threatening. For a short time, everyone unanimously agrees to maintain their best behaviour, at least until the next major harvest festival takes place. You have successfully navigated the darkest night, paid respect to the holy figures, and lived to share the story. Ultimately, that is the essence of All Saints' Day: balance. After the chaotic night of fear and unrestrained fun, you honour the saints, express gratitude for your closely knit community, and maybe, just maybe, make an internal promise to conceal the root vegetable lanterns a little more effectively next year. If you believe Halloween is exclusively concerned with spectral beings and frightening creatures, you clearly have not spent enough time recovering from the residual effects of a medieval village celebration. Because after the prayers have been concluded and the saints have been suitably honoured, it is time for an activity that unites the living far more reliably than any formal ritual: boisterous, drunken festivity. That's correct. Medieval Halloween also serves as a perfect excuse for the entire village to fully relax, momentarily forget their daily struggles, and attempt not to inflict any serious harm upon themselves or their public image. Everything begins around the communal bonfire. Once the necessary religious duties are completed, the food and drink begin to flow abundantly. And in a time where clean drinking water is highly unreliable and milk is reserved strictly for infants or for cheese making, there is only one safe and socially accepted beverage choice: alcohol. Ale is poured freely by the large pitcher. Fermented cider is continuously passed from person to person. The fortunate few who have access to honey have mead, which essentially represents the medieval equivalent of a high-end cocktail, assuming you do not mind a small trace of honeycomb residue in every single sip. You quickly grab a mug containing something bubbly and vaguely unfamiliar, hoping that it is just potent enough to thoroughly warm your body and sufficiently blur your painful memories of last winter's hardships. The children are firmly sent to bed, or at least instructed to stay close to the fading embers, leaving the adults free to fully relive their youth with questionable dance moves and spontaneous singing. Someone always initiates the singing, typically with a traditional folk song about root vegetables, a lost romantic partner, or a stubborn pig that resisted being butchered. The song lyrics are loosely interpreted and become increasingly imaginative and generally more scandalous the later the night gets. Dancing is inevitable. Someone produces a battered hand drum, another person brings out a chipped wooden flute, and before you can fully register it, a long line of villagers is weaving and snaking around the massive fire in a form of choreography that can most accurately be described as passionate but dangerously clumsy. Medieval footwear is definitely not designed for reliable traction. You slip, you stumble, and you silently hope that your fall is humorous enough to generate applause, not pity. There is a resounding cheer every time someone manages to successfully jump over a dying piece of ember, and a collective, sharp gasp when Gerald, having consumed one large mug too many, attempts to leap over the entire bonfire and nearly destroys the entire table holding the soul cakes. Simple pub games begin as the night grows deeper. Intense arm wrestling contests pit strong farmers against quick-skilled weavers. Wheelbarrow races conducted on the single flat section of ground not currently occupied by farm animals lead to more painful bruises and even more uncontrollable laughter. There is an established custom of narrating increasingly terrifying ghost stories, with each participant trying to outdo the last, until everyone present is either screaming or deeply howling with laughter, or quite possibly both reactions at once. As the mugs are emptied, the conversations become both more profound and far stranger. There is deep philosophizing about the very nature of supernatural beings, heated arguments over whether Agnes's homemade bread is genuinely cursed, and the occasional intensely emotional confession loudly declared across the fire about how much everyone secretly cares for each other, at least until the fermented honey drink is completely gone. If you are fortunate, you will overhear stories of ancient forgotten battles, improbable love affairs, and perhaps, if the convivial mood is exactly right, the complete origin story of that one remarkably peculiar goat who seems to appear only during annual festival nights. Of course, not every person remains awake until the end. The individuals who are less experienced with drinking and a few of the long-time veterans inevitably end up sleeping soundly in a wheelbarrow, resting precariously on top of the cut firewood, or nestled deeply beneath the communal eating table, snoring with the kind of absolute peace that is only achieved after consuming 3 large tankards of ale and experiencing a night successfully and fully lived. If you wake up wearing someone else's hat or discover an unfamiliar root vegetable inside your shoe, you can be sure you celebrated the occasion appropriately. As the dawn begins to appear, the fire steadily diminishes, the loud singing softens into gentle humming, and everyone slowly shuffles back home, linking arms, their spirits significantly lighter and their memories just sufficiently hazy to fully excuse whatever happened on the makeshift dance floor. Ultimately, medieval drunken merriment is not about irresponsible overindulgence or escaping reality. It is profoundly about shared time together, the comfort found in collective laughter, and a mutual commitment to successfully navigate the long, cold winter nights ahead. And maybe, just maybe, next year, you will successfully remember not to let Gerald get anywhere near the massive bonfire. Modern Halloween is flooded with bright, smiling carved gourds, long rows of cheerful orange pumpkins with flickering candle-lit grins illuminating front porches. But in the medieval parts of Europe, the pumpkin is far across a great ocean, slowly growing somewhere in the uncharted new world. Here, you must make do with the vegetables the earth readily provides, the simple, resistant, and profoundly difficult to carve turnip. The tradition begins simply enough. The original text contains exactly 999 words. The following script maintains the same word count, text length, style, and type of narration in American English, with a natural flow, avoiding repetition and robotic phrasing, and adheres to all constraints regarding formatting. A fellow suggests crafting a lamp to scare away restless spirits, or maybe just to make a mockery of Gerald's allegedly haunted beat from the previous year. However, there isn't a single ideal hollow gourd waiting out in the fields. Instead, you're given a turnip, lumpy, deeply scarred, and about the weight and density of a really annoyed badger. If fate smiles on you, it won't be growing a questionable mould. If luck abandons you, well, you've just been inducted into the old world tradition of managing expectations. Equipped with a knife that's been used more often on crusty bread than on garden vegetables, you prepare for the task. The turnip, though, is absolutely unwilling to cooperate. Unlike a pumpkin, it doesn't offer a ready entryway or a spacious inside. You punch, you gouge, and you mutter oaths that would certainly earn the disapproval of your local clergyman. The inside flesh is stubborn, the outer skin is tougher still, and halfway through your hand feels frozen and you're seriously questioning if it's too late to consider another faith. Eventually you manage to scoop out a pit just barely large enough for the world's most pathetic candle. Then comes the artistic effort, if that's the right word for it. A couple of crude holes for eyes, a jagged slice for a mouth, and your finished lantern looks less like a mischievous phantom and more like something that should be left to rot at the bottom of a root cellar. Some villagers achieve real flair, cutting intricate designs or stacking several turnips for a multi-story display. Most, however, just accept whatever doesn't cave in or burst into flames within the first 60 minutes. Getting the turnip lit is its own unique struggle. Candles are a precious commodity, and the exterior wind is determined to ensure your lamp's failure. You carefully position the flame inside, shield it from the draught, and place the entire assembly in your window or on a pole by the path. The weak light flickers, throwing unsettling shapes, and frankly, it looks more disturbed than frightening. If it manages to stay alight for more than 5 minutes, you count it as a small miracle and immediately take full credit for your superior handicraft. For the village children, these carved turnips represent both excitement and fear. They compete to see who can produce the most hideous grimace or the most terrifying smile. A few dare one another to walk with their lanterns through the very darkest parts of the settlement, hoping to startle a friend or perhaps an unfortunate chicken. There are always legends, naturally. There are tales of the turnip that kept glowing until sunrise, or the one that managed to scare away not only ghosts, but also the neighbour's prize-winning goat. These stories grow taller with every passing year, much like the heap of leftover turnip peelings just outside the village gate. As you observe the long row of bumpy, shimmering lanterns, you can't help but feel a strange sense of honour. The turnip is far from being anyone's definition of perfect. It's slightly ugly, supremely dense, and more likely to confuse than to inspire awe. But for this single night, it serves as the centre of the festivities. It is living proof that with sufficient commitment, a sharp blade, and a willingness to weep in public, even the most humble vegetable can be made to glow. So this Halloween, before you admire the flawless symmetry of a modern jack-o'-lantern, spare a moment to think of your ancestors and their ghostly root vegetables. They may not have been beautiful, but they certainly kept the shadows at bay and gave the whole community something to laugh about year after year. In a medieval village, Halloween isn't exclusively about chasing away phantoms and gathering up soul cakes. It's also the best possible night to try and glimpse the future using whatever dubious equipment you have on hand. If you are hoping for picture-perfect predictions, or even just a comforting feeling of hope, you should prepare for disappointment. Medieval fortune-telling mostly involves apples, small candles, and a kind of reasoning that makes today's horoscopes seem like advanced quantum mechanics. It usually starts with the apple-based games. Apples are valued partly because they are actual, edible sustenance and partly because they can function as magical guides, at least for one night only. The most popular feat is with the apple skins. You attempt to cut the apple in a single, continuous spiral, taking care not to let the peel break, and then you throw it over your shoulder. The letter shape it creates on the ground is said to be the first initial of your future husband or wife, unless, of course, it ends up looking exactly like a question mark, or, worse still, a garden worm. In that case, you simply play it off with a laugh and pretend you were only checking for freshness. Next on the agenda is bobbing for apples. But this isn't merely for amusement. The person who snags an apple on their very first attempt is set for great fortune, maybe even a wedding before the next harvest. If you fail to catch one, well, you're sentenced to another year of being unmarried and the target of friendly mockery. The real good luck, of course, is avoiding swallowing too much of the barrel water and managing to dodge Gerald's coughing fit from the previous round. Candles are another essential instrument in your medieval prophecy kit. A common ritual involves lining up several candles in a dark room and watching to see which one burns with the greatest intensity. The strongest flame signifies prosperity for the person standing nearest, which naturally causes a suspicious amount of subtle pushing and shoving among the villagers. Another custom requires two people to jointly hold a candle and gaze into a looking glass. The boldest among them hope to witness the face of their one true love. The more cautious simply hope not to see a ghost or, even worse, their mother-in-law suddenly appearing behind them. Bread and nuts are also featured heavily. A typical practice is to bake tiny trinkets into the celebratory buns, coins for future wealth, a sewing thimble for a life of hard work, a simple button for an unknown destiny. If you happen to bite down on a charm, you are expected to look thrilled, even if you nearly crack a molar. For those who are more easily swayed by superstition, roasting hazelnuts over the fire allows you to read your prospects for romance. If the nuts crackle or burn, that is bad news. If they roast calmly, congratulations, true love is supposedly approaching, or at least you'll have another year of edible nuts. Some methods demand even less effort. Dream interpretation holds major significance. Eat a piece of special, tasteless dumb cake, sleep on your left side, and you will supposedly dream of your future partner. If your dreams feature only barn animals or turnips, well, you simply choose not to discuss it the following morning. Naturally, all these fortune-telling rites are best enjoyed in a group of friends, accompanied by laughter, mild panic, and a healthy dose of doubt. Nobody genuinely expects perfect clarity. But in a world where life is insecure, the weather is unpredictable, and your next meal is often a gamble, these silly traditions provide a small spark of hope, a bit of fellowship, and maybe a valid reason to eat an extra piece of fruit. So as the flames crackle and the villagers pass around the last pieces of bread, everyone takes a chance. Apples are peeled, candles are lit, fortunes are divined, and the future, no matter how remote, feels slightly nearer. And if the signs turn out to be dire, you just place the blame on the apples. Finish your cider and vow that next year you will attempt a completely different kind of mystical ritual. If you believe that today's Halloween mischief is risky, with all the toilet-papered trees and fake rubber pests, travel back in time to medieval Europe, where trick-or-treating meant risking your public reputation, your poultry, and occasionally your actual well-being. Forget about throwing eggs at houses. These are pranks with genuine consequences, often involving barnyard animals, open fire, and the kind of carelessness only a medieval peasant can muster after 3 tankards of questionable booze. First, you must accept that the distinction between a harmless joke and an actual offence is blurry at best. The quintessential trick? Taking away all the village footwear. You might wake up to discover every single boot and clog gone from outside your door, only to find them lined up against the churchyard wall or dangling high from a tree branch. The perpetrators are usually a joyful group of children or adults who have consumed enough mead to revert several decades. The outcome? A seriously confusing morning and a village-wide hunt that doubles as both entertainment and a firm reminder not to own anything of value. But why stop at mere footwear? Another common favourite is moving the signposts, or, to be more precise, switching out the rough wooden markers so that travellers end up lost in someone else's livestock pen. If you've just moved to town, good luck reaching the market without walking in a pointless circle for 2 hours. Even the local priest is not safe. More than one has found the door to their church replaced with the tavern sign, which resulted in a record attendance at the early morning service. Farm animals, understandably, are prime targets. Nothing screams Happy Halloween like finding your favourite goat marked with streaks of berry juice or your chickens dressed in tiny scraps of fabric. Occasionally, an exceptionally daring prankster will sneak a sheep into a person's kitchen or, for the ultimate surprise, drop a live eel into the family's only source of drinking water. The The resulting screams are legendary, and so is the frantic chase that follows, usually concluding with a pile of muddy villagers, a runaway eel, and a whole new set of rules for the next year's celebrations. Of course, not every prank is so relatively safe. Some of them cross a definite line into outright danger, at least by contemporary standards. Igniting a fuse of gunpowder, or the closest medieval substitute, dried beans and a strong dose of imagination, is a guaranteed way to cause mass panic, especially if you coordinate it with a ghost story about fire demons hiding near the fields. The most fearless tricksters erect scarecrows disguised as local rivals, placed to leap out from behind bushes at the exact wrong moment. More than one village feud has been sparked by a cleverly arranged phantom on a string. Naturally, the boundary between pure amusement and genuine trouble is incredibly thin. If a joke goes too far, say someone's prized cheese is stolen or a valuable pig ends up dyed blue, there is an emergency meeting in the centre of the square, payment is demanded, apologies are shouted, and 9 times out of 10 everyone is laughing about it before the next harvest rolls around. The unofficial understanding is to avoid doing anything that cannot be easily undone with hard labour, a shared loaf of bread or a complimentary drink at the pub. Still, Halloween pranks are a necessary outlet for medieval villagers to release stress, test their ingenuity, and maybe, just maybe, get away with a little bit of mayhem. If you wake up to find your mattress filled with hay, your cat painted like a mythical beast, or your front door inverted, you shrug, you chuckle, and you swear to get revenge next year. Because ultimately, pranks aren't just about pure mischief, they are about community, shared memories, and the sheer delight of knowing that for one wild night, you are allowed to be completely reckless and still survive. It's getting late. The bonfire is dying down and the heavy mist is drifting over the harvested fields like a large blanket with sinister intentions. In the traditions of medieval Halloween, this is the time when every sensible villager begins to nervously check their own backyard. The ancient farmlands beyond the settlement, covered with the last remnants of the harvest stubble, are officially considered haunted ground. If you hear lowing, bleating, or the unholy wail of a donkey after the stroke of midnight, it might not simply be runaway livestock. It could be something far more terrifying. Everyone has a tale to tell. There's the story of the midnight cow, a ghostly animal rumoured to roam the fields, mooing so loudly it turns milk sour and causes chickens to fall into fits of absolute terror. Some people claim she glows in the dark, her eyes burning like miniature lanterns, while others insist she's completely unseen, but leaves behind footprints in unlikely places, such as on the roof of the blacksmith's shed. Children dare each other to stand by the edge of the field and listen for her, though most of them last only 10 minutes before racing home, convinced they saw glowing horns behind the scarecrow. Sheep are no less unnerving. Rumour suggests that on Halloween night a ghost flock appears, phantom sheep whose wool is so stark white it seems to sparkle in the moonlight. They graze in areas where no grass should grow and disappear if approached, leaving only patches of cold earth and an unpleasant feeling that you've been silently judged by livestock from the afterlife. If an actual sheep is found missing tonight, everyone simply shrugs and blames the supernatural. It's a convenient excuse, especially if you forgot to mend the fence. But why all the spectral animals? Blame the fields themselves. These lands are ancient, deeply layered with legends, old superstitions, and more than a few suspiciously shallow burial plots. Every unusual shadow is seen as a restless soul. Every strange noise after sunset is an ominous sign, or, at the very least, a bored raccoon searching for turnips. The oldest residents tell stories of farmers who unearthed mysterious human bones while ploughing and were subsequently cursed for the rest of their lives by bad fortune and inexplicable intestinal gas. Even ordinary crows join the fun, cawing in unison as if they are announcing some ghostly livestock procession. The line between reality and myth is as fine as the rolling mist. Someone is always convinced they've seen a 2-headed calf at sunrise or a rooster that crows at midnight with a voice suspiciously like that of the priest. Sometimes villagers wake to discover their haystacks have been moved into unsettling patterns, their gardening tools are scattered, or their ox is painted with a racing stripe down its back, a sure sign that the local pranksters, or possibly the spirits, have been up to something. Naturally, everyone employs their own method for protection. Some tie bright red ribbons to their animals' tails to fend off evil spirits. Others leave an extra scoop of feed at the far edge of the field, just in case. The bravest among them hang garlic around the doors of their barns, or, if they are truly paranoid, choose to sleep in the hayloft to keep watch, clutching a pitchfork and mumbling prayers to Saint Anthony, the patron saint of, "Please let that just be a normal sheep." By the time morning arrives, the fields look as unremarkable as usual, and the livestock return to their usual states of boredom and apathy. Still, no one ever forgets the unsettling stories. They are recounted every year, each time with fresh details and more elaborate hauntings. In all honesty, the only thing more persistent than a medieval ghost cow is the powerful imagination of the villagers themselves. Because in the end, haunted fields and phantom animals are just an expected part of the season, a method to laugh at the encroaching darkness, to make sense of the unexplainable, and to remind everyone that in a tough world where anything can go wrong, sometimes it's easier to blame a ghostly goat than your own shoddy fence repair skills. The first hint of daylight filters through the narrow gaps in your shutter, softly illuminating a chaotic scene that can only be called a celebratory disaster. The bonfire from the night before has finally died down to a mound of smoking kindling. The air is thick with the competing aromas of sour, spilled ale, burnt bread, and someone's misguided attempt at roasting root vegetables that went absolutely terribly wrong. It is the morning after Halloween, and nothing confirms a successful party like the feeling that your mouth is coated with sawdust, and your head is being squeezed by an invisible iron band. Your home is a showcase of questionable actions. There's a mask made of tangled sheep's wool mixed into the floor rushes, a shoe that you absolutely do not recognise, and, most disturbingly, a half-carved turnip lantern still faintly flickering in the corner. You cannot recall if it's meant to ward off spirits or if it's merely a forgotten prop from the world's most depressing puppet show. Regardless, you decide to avoid looking at it and concentrate on the crucial objective of sitting absolutely motionless. Other villagers emerge from their homes in similar states of discomfort. Agnes stumbles out of her cottage, her hair a mess, clinging to the last soul cake as if it holds the secret to everlasting life. Gerald is meticulously picking hay out of his beard and trying to understand why his feet are covered with a tablecloth. The children, completely unaffected by hangovers and powered by the last remnants of sugar from apples and nuts, are already outside, comparing their scratches and trading terrifying tales of ghosts, each one more frightening than the last, and none of them remotely based in fact. Breakfast is a quiet, subdued affair. The long communal table is covered with the culinary wreckage of the previous night, cold stew, hardened bread crusts, and, of course, an alarming amount of mangled turnip pieces. Someone attempts to pass off a plate of leftover roasted onions as a curative food. You pretend to accept this, mostly because you lack the energy to argue about it. There is a short argument over whether the remaining jug of cider is safe to consume, but ultimately it is used to wash away regret and the persistent bitter taste of charred leek. Now comes the moment of truth. People exchange stories, attempting to reconstruct exactly what transpired after the third round of communal singing and before Gerald's memorable goat impersonation. There are whispered stories of a late-night dance around the village well, a dramatic confrontation over the last honey cake, and the small mystery of the missing church bell rope. The local priest, looking significantly more exhausted than saintly, offers a supplementary prayer for good sense, excellent health, and the confirmed safety of all farm animals. No one mentions the upside-down wheelbarrow still firmly embedded in the mud near the village square. This is the hour for resolutions to be made. Promises are quickly sworn. Never again will you consume so many nuts, dance so close to the dangerous bonfire or permit Gerald anywhere near the cider barrel. The children vow to be more daring next year. The adults vow to be more sensible, a promise that everyone knows will hold up exactly until the start of the next festival. Eventually, normalcy is restored, the village is tidied up, all the leftover turnip lanterns are thrown to the pigs who wisely refuse to eat them, and the last few crumbs of soul cake are shared with anyone still awake enough to appreciate them. You locate your missing shoe, your headache finally begins to subside, and you start to welcome the simple ordinary rhythm of daily existence. Yet as you sweep up the ashes and listen to the faint sound of distant laughter, a small smile creeps onto your face. The morning after medieval Halloween is an equal mix of genuine physical pain and a quiet pride, a brutal hangover blended with a sense of accomplishment. Somehow you survived the dark night, the nasty pranks, and the lurking ghosts, and as always, you are already anticipating doing it all over again next year. In the medieval village, Halloween may be a night for the adults to drive away evil spirits and toast to the saints, but for the children it is a rare and precious opportunity for total unbridled anarchy. Forget about chocolate bars and flashing neon outfits. Here the real treat is mischief, and the costumes are made from whatever can be grabbed before your brothers and sisters do. If you are under the age of 12, tonight is less about the fear of the supernatural and more about finding out exactly how much trouble you can create before a grown-up finally notices. It all begins with a thrilling anticipation. The few days leading up to Halloween are filled with hushed whispers, secret schemes, and a constantly growing collection of disguises fashioned from kitchen scraps, worn-out caps, and feathers illegally taken from the chicken coop. If you are very lucky, your mother will permit you to borrow a tiny amount of soot for face paint, but otherwise dirt and crushed berries work perfectly well. The final result is a small gang of miniature phantoms who look like they barely survived a fight with a vegetable garden and are incredibly proud of it. Sugar, naturally, is a scarce item. The closest you will get to actual sweets is an apple, perhaps a handful of roasted nuts, or a slightly hard soul cake, given with a stern warning to eat it quickly before the mice find it. The absence of candy does nothing to slow down the mischief, however. If anything, it sharpens your focus. Instead of comparing chocolate wrappers, the children compete over their most successful pranks, hiding shoes up in the hayloft, tying a chicken firmly to Gerald's door handle, or sneaking a carved turnip into the priest's own bed. No one expects to get into severe trouble, and if you do, it is usually worth the excellent story you get to tell for the following 12 months. Halloween night is a vast, open playground. The older kids lead the wild charge, inventing increasingly elaborate ways to terrify the younger ones, leaping out from behind ancient trees, howling like wild wolves, or furiously flapping their arms and pretending to be Agnes's cursed goose. There are frantic chases through the muddy fields, mock skirmishes with sticks, and the yearly competition to determine who can sneak up behind the main bonfire and make the most adults physically jump. Points are given for genuine creativity and noticeable style. Deductions are assigned if you accidentally cause someone to spill their precious ale. Parents mostly turn a blind eye to the chaos. As long as no child ends up falling into the duck pond or successfully knocks over the main cider barrel, they are content. The general consensus is that children will be children. This chaos serves a significant purpose. It allows everyone to burn off the anxious energy from a year of constant chores and rules and gives the entire village something new to laugh about once the harvest work is finally completed. Some adults actually encourage the fun, secretly slipping their own children extra nuts or a piece of bread to share and pretending not to see the muddy footprints that lead directly to the kitchen pantry. As the night draws to a close and the bonfire becomes a mound of glowing embers, the children finally run out of new ideas for tricks or simply run out of energy entirely. They collapse in exhausted piles near the fire, their faces smeared with a mix of dirt and happiness, trading their last bits of scavenged loot. and already making detailed plans for next year. Some drift off to sleep clutching their soul cake, others with a stray chicken feather still carefully tucked behind one ear. They will wake up feeling stiff and dirty but totally satisfied, knowing that they were the true focus of the entire evening. In a world without modern sweets or electronic screens, medieval Halloween truly belongs to the kids. Their joyful laughter, their endless mischief, and their untamed energy are the best possible defense against the coming darkness. Solid proof that even during the toughest times, joy and chaos will always manage to find a path. And as the grown-ups look on with tired, knowing smiles, everyone silently agrees that a Halloween without sugar can actually be the very sweetest of all. Every single year, as the autumn wind howls through the roof eaves and the fields slowly disappear into the twilight, you remember all the old stories in a medieval village. The legends here are not confined to old dusty books. They live and breathe in the very air, in the half-whispered cautious warnings and the haunted expressions someone gets after spending just a bit too much time outside after the sun has set. Even as the centuries continue to pass, the lingering echoes of medieval Halloween simply refuse to disappear. There is something unique about the weird traditions, the strange superstitions, and the moments of utter absurdity that keeps them permanently alive, constantly haunting the imagination long after the very last turnip lantern has finally gone dark. You can clearly see it in the tales that are passionately shared by the fireside when all the heavy chores are finally done, and the only source of illumination comes from the hearth and a damaged, lonely candle. Someone always has a clear favourite: the mythical spirit cow that endlessly haunts the barley field, the mysterious phantom flock of ghostly sheep, or the ancient wise woman who could successfully curse a thief with nothing more than a few mumbled words and a handful of dried nettle leaves. Each new retelling adds surprising twists and turns. Last year's relatively harmless prank instantly morphs into this year's terrifying ghost sighting. And that unsettling noise you distinctly heard behind the barn suddenly sounds a great deal more menacing and suspicious. The core legends continue to grow with every passing generation. Children add their own fantastical embellishments, claiming to see strange, ghostly lights flickering in the distant woods or hearing voices mysteriously carried on the chilling wind. Adults pretend that they know believe any of it, but they still nervously hang dried herbs over their doors and keep a cautious, wary eye on the old village well just the same. In a world where so many essential things are uncertain, these shared stories become a necessary way to make sense of everything. A poor harvest, a sudden violent storm, the inexplicable disappearance of a work shoe or a valuable sheep. After all, it is far, far easier to blame the powerful supernatural than it is to admit you completely forgot to properly fix the fence. And it is not simply about pure fear. The tales that survive the ages are often amusing, even reassuring. There is the anecdote of Gerald's supposedly possessed turnip, which stayed lit for 3 days thanks to a hidden supply of candles and sheer willpower. Or the narrative of Agnes's cat, rumoured to be a witch's companion, but who truly just favoured snoozing on the warmest person around. These accounts unite the community, giving everyone a reason to share a joke when the cold season gales blow and the outer world appears slightly off. Too large. The ancient customs possess an obstinate strength. Illuminating a lantern against the shadows, exchanging a sweet bread, chanting a ridiculous melody near the massive fire. These actions link you to what came before and to one another. Even if you scoff at the superstitions, you still instinctively toss a piece of bread by the fireplace or whisper a benediction just to be safe. There is solace in these routines, a feeling of belonging to an enduring, connected history of people who met the gloom with good cheer and optimism. As centuries pass and contemporary existence moves ahead, a remnant of that old Halloween soul persists. You observe it in every decorative squash, every scary story shared in the black, and every fearful look at a noisy floorboard. The law refuses to fade because it addresses a fundamental desire that never quite vanishes. The urge to make sense of the mysterious, to find humour in the face of terror, and to discover a flicker of light, no matter how small, in the depths of the year's longest evenings. So when another Halloween approaches, take a moment to reflect on the stories that linger. They may be old, and a bit silly, but they soon know. They also prove that deep down, we all enjoy a fine narrative and a reason to keep the warmth burning a little longer. Long before the term fairy meant delicate wings and floral headwear, the words struck medieval villagers with a totally different kind of horror. In this world, fairies are not delicate. They are menacing. They do not scatter sparkle dust. They cause livestock to disappear, ruin the cream, and entice children into the trees with promises of shiny pebbles and guaranteed disaster. On Halloween, when the divide between realms is said to shrink, you take steps to guard against phantoms and sorceresses, but most importantly, you never, ever stop watching the fair folk. You begin by securing your entrances, not only to exclude drifting spectres or nosy neighbours, but to prevent fairies from sneaking inside and exchanging your infant for a replacement creature. This is a legitimate fear. The village herbalist shares stories of babies kidnapped and substituted with strange, sickly children who recoil from the sight of metal or the tolling of church bells. Mothers sleep lightly, and fathers strew iron spikes and cold ash across doorways, reciting prayers and hoping their own child survives the night. Dairy is another crucial spot. Usually, it is the most valuable item in the home. Sustenance for the young, cream for the clergyman's beverage, and currency for bartering services. But on Halloween, you consistently leave out a couple of bowls, not as a sign of fellowship, but as a payment. Everyone understands that if you neglect this, you will discover your cow dry, your butter spoiled, or your finest cheese inexplicably missing. Some assert that fairies prefer milk over gold and will repay a generous household by not cursing the fowl or spoiling the root vegetables. Others suggest it is only Gerald sneaking around for a late-night snack, but no one is willing to take the chance. Fairy rings, those puzzling circles of fungi that spring up overnight, are strongly avoided on Halloween. You caution the youngsters, do not enter, do not even point at them. The rings are fairy passages, and everyone knows that if you stay too long, you might find yourself dragged into a frantic dance, forced to whirl until your footwear dissolves, or worse, until you are permanently gone. There are family anecdotes about that one male relative who vanished for a year and returned, speaking of music, no mortal could play, and a sudden desire for stinging nettle broth. It is not just the children who are frightened. Adult males carry bread scraps in their pockets just in case, and women tie colourful fabric strips to their cows' tails to keep them safe from fairy mischief. A small amount of salt is tucked into every crib, and people make the sign of the cross at the sound of laughter drifting through the fog, especially if it seems to materialise out of nowhere. You keep your gaze low, your tasks completed, and your thanks quiet. The fair folk, after all, detest being appreciated. By 12, the entire village is a collection of protective items and customs. There are containers of cream on window ledges, metal shears beneath pillows, and a shared understanding that if you hear your name called from the blackness, you must not respond, no matter how much it sounds like your mother, your close friend, or the priest promising an early conclusion to church service. When the sun rises, the milk is consumed, the infants are unharmed, and the cattle are largely content. Was it a spell? Was it mere luck? Or was it simply the result of centuries of meticulous, nervous ritual? No one knows, but one thing is for sure. In the medieval era, the fairies were constantly observing, and a bit of offered milk was a minor expense for another calm Halloween. If you assume seeking excitement is a modern development, you have obviously never watched a medieval person assess a roaring blaze after a couple drinks of fermented honey beverage. On Halloween, with the enormous fire blazing in the town square, leaping over the flames is not merely an activity. It is practically a communal obligation. Tonight, the heat is more than warmth and illumination. It is a trial of bravery, a showcase of audacity, and a chance for the local medical practitioner to practice removing splinters. It begins harmlessly enough. The massive fire is constructed high, fed all day with discarded lumber, old roof straw, and anything the metalworker could spare from his stock. By the darkness, it is a towering conflagration, casting dancing shapes across the faces of everyone assembled. Children are kept far away, at least initially, until someone looks elsewhere. Adults socialise at the perimeter, drinking weak ale and trying to guess who will be the first to attempt the jump. There are guidelines, of course, unspoken, inconsistent, and mostly made up right then. Leap over the lowest point of the blaze, not the tallest. Do not wear your nicest shirt. Absolutely no goats, chickens, or carved gourds allowed in the jumping area. And if you are caught cheating by, say, waiting until the heat diminishes to a glowing pile of coals, you will be criticised in the court of public opinion long after the night ends. The most fearless or most careless go first. A fast run, a loud yell, and a jump that relies more on hope than technique. If you clear the fire, you are the champion for the evening. At least until someone inevitably jumps farther than you or recounts a more impressive story about last year's attempt. If you fail to clear the fire, you stand up, brush off your slightly scorched dignity, and claim it was intentional. A few observers will applaud, most will laugh, and at least one relative will insist on examining your foot coverings for burn marks. For the young and unmarried, fire jumping carries added meaning. Law suggests that a successful leap brings prosperity, fertility, or depending on the storyteller, a guaranteed marriage proposal before the spring season. If you are caught holding hands in the air, it is either the start of lasting romance or a guaranteed way to fall headfirst into the mud. Either outcome will be the subject of village talk for months. Naturally, not everyone volunteers eagerly. Some are nominated by companions after boasting too much about their physical ability, or by family members seeking leverage material. The local healer, who spends the evening waiting at the edge with a container of mysterious unguent and an expression of patient acceptance, is likely the only person not entertained by the display. Twisted ankles, hurt pride, and one unforgettable event involving a smoking shoe are all part of the yearly spectacle. The fire, despite its danger, is also symbolic. In the medieval view, jumping the flames is a method to abandon the bad fortune and trouble of the previous year, landing safely, if a bit singed, on the path ahead. It is a ritual purification, a challenge to fate, and primarily an excuse to behave foolishly with everyone you know observing. As the night concludes, the enormous fire has shrunk to a comforting glow, the jumpers are tending their injuries, and the village is already retelling the night's most successful leaps and worst falls. If you succeeded in leaping over, congratulations, you have secured another year of good luck. If you did not, well, at least you have an excellent anecdote for the following Halloween. Every medieval community has one. She is the woman who resides at the border of the cultivated ground, whose vegetable patch always seems to thrive suspiciously well, and who possesses the perfect remedy to rub on a painful foot or a persistent cough. On Halloween, she is the busiest and most anxiously respected person in the settlement. She is the wise woman, the healer, the rumoured sorceress, or, depending on the source, just exceptionally good at predicting outcomes. You will locate her dwelling by following the scent of dried botanicals and the faint murmur of local gossip. Her walls are decorated with bunches of sage, nettle, and mugwort. Peculiar jars line the shelves, some filled with honey, others with components of deeply unknown origin. When a child develops a fever, she is the first person summoned. When a cow refuses to give milk, someone is already hurrying to her door. Even the parish priest, who maintains he dismisses such foolishness, sends his relative to retrieve her herbal tea when he catches a cold on Halloween night. Her standing grows even stronger. The boundaries between realms are permeable. and everyone desires a little extra protection. She offers defensive trinkets, woven threads, beads, small pieces of iron for a small fee, or sometimes just a smile. Children wait in line for a small amount of salve on their forehead. Mothers request insight about dreams, and at least one anxious adolescent asks about romantic potions, which more often than not turn out to be nothing more than sweetened rose water and a firm admonition to clean behind your ears. Yet her knowledge is a complicated blessing. She might be praised at sunset and regarded with suspicion at sunrise. Medieval reasoning is unreliable. If your skin rash disappears, she is a miracle worker. If it does not, or if your neighbour's goat becomes ill the same week, perhaps she is involved in something less sacred. The distinction between a skillful woman and a witch is as fine as the mist on the fields, and it changes with every rumour, every unexplained sickness, and every poorly timed thunderstorm. She is aware of this and remains cautious. Her stories are always veiled in obscurity. Her treatments offered with a shrug might help, might not. Give it a try. She is a specialist in vagueness. Is her potion for bad dreams truly effective? Or is it simply that you are more likely to sleep soundly once you have travelled 3 miles in the dark to acquire it? In either case, the results speak for themselves. Children believe she can communicate with animals, and some adults privately agree. Her cat, large and inscrutable, is both a friend and a quiet warning. Ask no more questions. She is seen as a birth attendant, a medical practitioner, a matchmaker, and when the feeling takes her, a giver of minor hexes for those who deserve them, although these are typically just clever uses of garlic and a knowing glance. On Halloween, people bring her offerings bread, cheese, an occasional bottle of hard apple juice. In return for good wishes and safety, she accepts everything with the same courtesy, understanding the importance of goodwill and extra cheese. As the great fire crackles and shadows move, her figure by the flames appears both normal and just a little larger than life. The wise woman stands at the intersection of apprehension and hope, tradition and doubt. Whether she is a sorceress, a doctor, or just highly perceptive, no one can quite decide. But when the nights are long and the world feels unstable, you're always slightly relieved she is on your side, even if you are not sure why her cat is looking at you that way. Forget the streaming selections, film scores, or spooky audio mixes. In medieval Halloween, your music is entirely local, and no one ever sings in tune. The evening air is filled with a combination of haunting melodies, spontaneous repeated phrases, and enough poorly pitched singing to call up spirits, if not make them retreat in confusion. It begins with the great fire. The dancing heat seems to demand a tune, and someone always volunteers. There is the community poet, holding his damaged stringed instrument with only half the wires remaining, attempting to tune it by firelight. If he is sober, you might hear a sad song about lost affection or failed harvests. If not, anticipate a collection of traditional tunes, some dubious rhymes, and at least one made-up verse about Gerald's terrible attempt at retrieving apples from water. Chants are essential. They are part prayer, part theatrical performance, and part group emotional release. As night deepens, the townsfolk gather in circles, humming, singing, or just mumbling the old words everyone pretends to recall. Spirits, depart. Ghosts, beware. Keep away from Agnes's baked goods. It truly does not matter what you utter as long as everyone joins in. The sound rises and falls with the gusts, sometimes soft and reassuring, sometimes sharp enough to startle the livestock. Children love to make up their own songs. They'll suddenly invent new lyrics, yelling them out as loud as they can. If a ghost appears, stomp the ground. If you spot a witch, dash through the town. Their cackles fill the silence between verses, travelling out into the distant fields where, lore suggests, the dead listen close and sometimes answer with a cold draught or the far-off call of an owl. Percussion definitely happens, if you include hitting empty barrels, upside-down buckets, or anything that makes noise. The drumming is never consistent, but it gets everyone moving. Soon, the entire town is swept up in an unpredictable mess of taps, applause, and feet thudding. It's less of a musical group and more of a slightly menacing rhythm section. The most daring dancer leaps into the circle, cloak flying behind them, feet kicking, either doing a decent impression of a phantom or simply working off that night's excessive ale. The church bell provides its own chilling timing. When midnight arrives, its deep toll slices through the noise, a harsh reminder that not every visitor tonight is welcomed. For a short moment, everyone falls silent, waiting for the sound to fade, hoping it was loud enough to frighten off anything with unresolved matters. Every so often, the community's wise woman starts a simple chant, her voice low, part singing, part magic spell. She knows melodies older than memory, songs to keep misfortune away, to soothe troubled souls, or to encourage people to eat more garlic for protection. She insists her chants are slow, strange, and completely captivating. Even the farm animals seem to pay attention. As the hours pass, voices get strained, the beat starts to trip, and the tunes become more ridiculous. Someone inevitably begins a truly silly, endless song about enchanted cheese or the most timid farm bird in the world. It doesn't matter. The whole sound is created from spirit, fear, and a refusal to let the darkness win. When the huge fire finally burns down low and the final prayer is breathed into the smoke-filled air, you realize these strange, off-key sounds are part of what keeps the malevolent spirits away and what keeps the community unified. It's the music of persistence, of finding laughter despite the fear, and of surviving one more old-world Halloween. Safely and loudly they made it through, in the commotion of the medieval Halloween, while everyone is busy securing their souls, their winter stores, and the very last container of apple juice. Someone always remembers the most vulnerable residents of the home, the creatures. Cats, dogs, and chickens, each a focal point for countless old wives' tales, need their own rituals for defence. Because in the medieval perspective, if a ghost wants to bother you, it will start with your livestock. Start with the cats. During the rest of the year, cats are both a blessing and an annoyance. Excellent at catching mice, but also the first suspect in any mysterious trouble. On Halloween, though, they turn into valuable protectors. Local stories claim that a dark cat can actually see ghosts and scare away wicked forces, as long as you treat it kindly. This means bigger portions at the meal, a ribbon tied gently around the neck, red for good fortune, and strict orders for the kids not to pull its tail. For one evening, the cat goes from being a suspicious nuisance to an honoured sentinel, relaxing smugly by the fire, pretending not to notice the sudden respect. Dogs are next. Medieval dogs are faithful, vocal, and notoriously unconcerned with the concept of personal boundaries. Tonight, you keep them inside, or at least chained close to the dwelling. A dog howling when the clock strikes midnight is viewed as a terrible sign, evidence that something unnatural is lurking nearby. To avoid this, some people feed their dogs a unique dinner or rub their ears with garlic. The dogs are less enthusiastic about this custom than their owners. A few brave souls secure a piece of iron to the collar, convinced it will repel bad luck and wandering entities. If the dog keeps barking, you can only hope it's at a passing fox, not something unexplainable. Then there are the chickens. Chickens, for reasons only known to the medieval mind, are heavily connected to Halloween myths. An egg laid after the sun goes down is suspicious and must be buried at the junction of two roads before sunrise, so it doesn't hatch a devil bird. Hens also receive red ribbons, and the coop is dusted with salt and herbs to discourage spirits, though that's just as likely to discourage Gerald's late-night egg-stealing. Children are instructed to be especially nice to the birds, so they don't stop producing eggs out of anger or supernatural meddling. All the farm animals are brought inside early, doors are bolted, and openings are covered. Even the family hog, if you have one, gets a rare spot of honour indoors, just until the worst of the night is over. Horses receive a special blessing and some extra hay. If you own a goat, it's probably already wearing 3 good luck charms and looks more stressed than usual. But the real power lies in the ceremonies themselves. Families whisper prayers over their animals, gently stroke them with hands smelling of rosemary and sage, and thank them for another year of partnership and provisions. For a few hours, the terror of spirits is eased by the warmth of a shared rite. Even the moodiest tomcat seems to know he's part of something large, bigger than just him. Come morning, the animals are naturally entirely unaffected by the previous night's excitement. Cats stretch and meow for food, dogs beg for whatever is on the table, chickens cluck as if nothing happened. But for the townspeople, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing they did absolutely everything they could to keep their animal companions safe from things that make noise or laugh strangely in the darkness. After all, in the world of medieval Halloween, protecting your creatures is just one more way to hold back the gloom, and maybe, if you're lucky, secure some quiet until the next long, strange night a year from now. As the last glow of the bonfire fades and the village settles back into its normal, slightly less cursed sadness, take a breath and let your body relax. You have survived medieval Halloween, a night of outfits made from whatever was loose, root vegetables carved with faces, suspicious pastries, and the general hope that the dead will remain courteously in their own domain. You endured smoky gatherings, scary stories intended to traumatize kids for life, and fire antics that made old-world insurance rates spike. You navigated the fine line between playful, simple belief and, oh no, not another curse, all with the composure of someone who just wants their farm animals accounted for. But for all the fear and bad dreams, there is a certain appeal to this ancient holiday. The strength of these villagers dancing, singing and laughing in the face of harsh winters and long odds is a form of magic itself. Even as they covered themselves in mud, moss and hides, even as they wondered if that sound in the dark was Uncle Reginald's ghost or just an angry fowl, they found unity and comfort with one another. So tonight, as you settle into a clean bed with actual heating and snacks that are highly unlikely to call up ghosts, perhaps offer a silent thank you to the countless people who made it through nights like these, who passed down narratives, traditions, and, let's be honest, a genuinely impressive collection of silly fears. History, ultimately, reminds us that humans are tough, full of superstitions, and a little bit ridiculous. It's also proof that we persevere, adapt, and always find a reason to gather by a source of light, whether for heat, protection, or just a chance to joke about the weirdness of it all. So don't worry. Tonight, you are safe from cursed root vegetables and phantom cows. The only ghosts you'll need to concern yourself with are the ones in your own imagination. Sleep soundly. And may your only late-night guest be a gentle breeze. And perhaps, just perhaps, a little lingering old-world mischief. Good night.